Hello everybody, this is the fourth video in a series where I show every single path effect in Inkscape. Now it's time to take a look at all effects in the final category, Convert. There is one last category that's not really a category, the experimental effects. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to cover it as an extra for this series. And since you're there commenting, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos on Inkscape and illustration. It really helps me and the channel grow. Attach path will create a new segment and attach it to another path. This effect does something similar to what the button Join Selected Endnodes with a New Segment in the tool controls of the Node tool does. This is another one of those incredibly useless path effects that makes you question why they were included. After applied, you'll need to supply the other path which will receive the new segment. Just copy it. In the Path Effects dialog, you have two identical set of options. One for the segment that will be generated from the start node, and another for the segment that will be generated from the end node. Depending on which of these two buttons you press, you'll be generating the segment from different nodes. The first and last node of a path are based on the order which you drew them. If the path is closed, then the effect will treat the starting and ending path as the same. Now with the effect working, you see these two yellow diamonds per path. One of the diamonds controls where in the path it will be stocked, and the other one controls the shape of this segment. It is kinda difficult to control, because this isn't just a normal segment. After playing with it for a few moments, you realize that you can control everything about its shape with this diamond, except for the beginning. For that, sadly, you'll need to come to the options in the Path Effect dialog. What you want to control are these two options in the Start Path Curve Start and End Path Curve Start that says Angle and Distance. A quick tip, if you want it to have the same behavior than a corner type, set these two values to 0. One final warning about this effect. You can drag both segments to the start and end of the other path, but this will not close it. If you try to make any style change, you should see that it only makes it to the path with the effect applied. This is yet another of those path effects that got me scratching my head at the inclusion, because I cannot think of a single reason to use it over just doing things manually. Construct Grid will build a grid following the angle made by the location of the first 3 nodes in a path. This one is actually really useful to learn, especially if you want to draw in an isometric perspective. The path does not have to be straight or have corner nodes, or even be open for this path effect to work. Like I said, it will take the first 3 nodes and it will make a grid using its location. Because of that, it's recommended that you use a simple 3-node straight path, just so it's easier to control. After it's been applied, you control its shape by manipulating the location of these 3 nodes. The only option in the Path Effect dialog is the size. And that's it. It's a super easy and fast way to build isometric grids. Ellipse from point is a very robust way to build any type of ellipses. This effect is great for putting ellipses in perspective. You can make an ellipse with a path with as little as 2 nodes, but in order to take full advantage of all options, I strongly recommend you to use an open path with 4 nodes. I also recommend you to enable Show Path Outline in the tool controls of the Node tool, just so you can see better the order of the nodes that you will use to control it. The first option that you should be aware of is the method. Different methods will have different options and ways to control the ellipse. There are a total of 5 different modes. Auto Ellipse and Force Circle both do the exact same thing. I can't notice a difference. This will just make a perfect circle. You can mess around with the location of the nodes to change its location and scale. With either method selected, you have some options that should feel very familiar if you played with the built-in ellipse. Arc, Other Side Arc, and Slice Arc. The Arc checkbox will build an arc, instead of a closed circle. Now you have either the end or start node to control how close the arc is gonna be. Other Side Arc will invert the arc, and Slice Arc will just close around its center. You need to have checked Arc to have the options to use Other Side Arc and Slice Arc. Let's move to the next mode for now. Isometric Ellipse will use 3 nodes to define a plane that the ellipse will conform to. Great to fit the ellipse into an isometric grid. The frame and axis options were available for the previous method we saw, but it makes more sense when used with an ellipse in perspective. Frame will just show the frame of the ellipse. This is helpful to fit maybe in a perspective grid. Axis will show the two axes, letting you know where the ellipse is pointing to. Useful when working in perspective. Then there is another option that could be useful, axis rotation. This will just rotate the ellipse. This will not change its form, it will still adjust to the position of the nodes, but again, it may be helpful when placing it in perspective. Perspective will take the 4 nodes locations and it will make a plane with them where the ellipse fits in. This is more useful to place the ellipse in proper perspective with accurate perspective distortion. This option also gives you access to these 2 checkboxes that are similar to the previous checkboxes we saw, but fit into proper perspective. Perspective square will show the outline of the plane where the ellipse fits in, useful to put it in perspective, and perspective axis show the axis of the plane, again useful to place the ellipse. The other method, Steiner ellipse, will just make an ellipse based on 3 nodes. And Steiner interellipse will do the same but generate the ellipse inside of the 3 nodes. Joint type just handles the joins and gaps using a path effect. This is another effect that has me questioning the reason behind it. Basically it does just that, allows you to control the join and gap and other properties that you will find in the Fill and Stroke style tab. To be honest, there is a couple of extra options that are not in there, but they are not that useful and it lacks some options that you find in that tab. So I don't know why anyone would want to use this effect. Maybe it is meant to be used by other tools or operations of the program. Some effects do that, as you'll see in a minute. Show handles will show icons related to the path right on top. Mostly it is used to show the location of the nodes and handles and the type of node. This is one of those niche effects that's used for particular things. It is not that useful for everyday drawing, that's why I won't go in depth in this video. Bspline will transform a normal path into a Bspline, which is a path that is controlled entirely by the corners. You do not have direct control over the shape, instead you control the nodes, which now have a weight value attached that determines how much affects that area. If you try to change the location of the handles, you see that it's not possible. They are locked into position. Again, with this effect you don't handle the path directly. What you can do is to use the handles to quickly change how much weight that corner has. Just hold Ctrl and drag. You'll notice that it snaps 2 times along the segment and then it snaps on the other corner, disappearing. If you want finer control over the weight, you can use the input box steps with Ctrl, which handle just that. You can also change the weight of all the corners at once with the change weight %. With the button Make Cusp, you eliminate all weight from all corners. This will make all sharp corners. Or you can use the button Default Weight to set all corners to the default weight, which is 33%. You do have the ability to use any of these options, but only on selected nodes by checking Change Only Selected Nodes. What's interesting about this effect is that you can use it to draw Bsplines directly with the pen tool. In the tool controls of the pen tool, you'll see a few buttons to select the modes. The third one allows you to draw directly using Bsplines. And what this mode does is applying this path effect on the fly, saving you the extra step of applying it to your shape. Once the shape is drawn, you can see the effect applied and you can see and change the properties we just saw. Really useful. Dashed strikes gives the path dashes. Just like the joint type effect we just saw, this is basically the path effect version of some of the properties in the Style tab of the Fill and Stroke dialog. However, this time there are some minor differences that worth a deeper look. You have more control over the way the dashes look. By using the number of dashes input box, you can set the amount of dashes. And by using the hole factor input box, you control the size of the holes. Another very useful option is use segment that apply these properties to the individual segments rather than the entire path. This is enabled by default and it's the recommended option. One unintended effect of enabling this option that I think is pretty useful is that now there are no holes on the corners, which always bothers me when using dashes. Half start end makes it so all corners have a half dash, and equalized dashes make all dashes have the same length no matter the length of the segment, which will break the number of dashes and holes set, but it will make it nice looking. There's one downside of using this effect instead of the traditional dashes, and that is that you cannot give it fill properly. It's broken. In the options in the effect dialog, it tells you that you should use the fill between many effect if you want a fill. If you would like to know how to use fill between many, check out the previous video in this series, linked to the path effect playlist in the description. Gears is a bit of a bizarre effect that transforms all nodes of a path into a gear. The gears are placed on the location of the nodes, adjusting its size and number of teeth according to the location of the nodes and the space between other nodes. The effect will try to place everything neatly together, but it is possible that some gear is missing or there is some overlapping because there was no space. The amount of teeth is also calculated depending on the size of the gear, and each teeth will try to fit in between other gears' teeth. On top of the teeth generated automatically, you can also add or remove by playing with the teeth input box. While you do not have control over the shape of the teeth, with the phi input, you can make them sharper. This effect is super niche and super janky. I feel that with a bit of retouch this effect could be useful for those very specific occasions where you need gears interlocking with each other, but the lack of customization, especially in the teeth, and the fact that nothing works like it should, makes it a hard pass for me. Measure segment is a super useful and complete measurements and annotation tool. It takes path and displays measurements of all kinds. I guess mostly to use in architectural blueprints. I'm gonna skip this effect in this video. It's certainly super interesting and it has like a million options, but I feel most people aren't gonna be interested in using it, and it will take a lot of time to cover everything. Just know that this effect is really useful for any time you want to display some sort of measurements or to make any type of blueprint. Spiro Spline will create spiral shapes based on the location of the nodes. You cannot apply it to an existing path. Instead, you enable this option in the tool controls of the pen tool before you start drawing. And just like with the Bspline options that we saw in the Bspline's path effect, now you draw with the effect enabled. I find it extremely unpredictable to use, to the point that it's almost useless to me, though I do not discard that this could be a bug, maybe a problem with my PC or with the operating system, because I do remember it used to work better on previous versions of Inkscape, though I don't remember too much because I never used it. You should certainly try it for yourself and see if it works for you. In any case, even after the nodes have been placed, the effect is still enabled, so you can still adjust it and move the nodes around, and the spiral shapes will adjust accordingly. And there are no options in the path effect dialog. Bounding box will just create a box around a path. Another kinda useless effect in my opinion. You first need a random shape that will be transformed into the bounding box. You apply the effect to this shape. Then you copy the path you want to have the bounding box, go to the path effect options and hit this button. Now the bounding box will resize to fit the shape of the other object. The bounding box path is a completely separated path, meaning it can be selected and it can have its own color or stroke. Elipse by 5 points will create an ellipse using the location of the first 5 nodes in a path. Another useless path effect in my opinion, especially having the ellipse by points effect, which we already saw and is much better. There really isn't that much to this effect. The path has to have at least 5 nodes or the effect will fail. There are no options in the path effect dialog. Avoid it and use ellipse by points instead. Interpolate Points will create a new path by interpolating the location of the nodes. That sounds more useful than it is. In reality, more or less what it does is to change slightly the curvature of the segment, as if you were changing the node type. You do have some options to change the type of interpolation, but they don't offer enough control to make it useful for anything. Another effect to avoid. Ruler adds some lines to the strokes to transform them into a ruler. Another path effect to make blueprints or other technical drawings. Even though you can use this effect with multiple segment paths or curves, it has no option to make measurements per object or segment, so most of the time you'll want to use it with a straight line. The unit is probably the most important option here. It sets the unit and the spacing of these lines. If you plan to use it as some kind of blueprint, you probably will want to use a metric measurement like centimeters. Mark distance will define the whole distance that the ruler is measuring, using the set unit. Measure length and minor length will set the length of the small and big lines. Major steps will define every how many small lines there will be a big line. Shift marks by will let you start the ruler with any small line instead of the big one. Offset will move the entire lines to the sides, not jumping from line to line like the previous option. Mark direction lets you set where the lines will show, on top, bottom, or overlapping. And border marks will let you enable or disable the extra lines at the start and end of the path. Really useful effect, especially if you're interested in more technical drawings. And we finally finished our path effect in Inkscape. Hopefully now you're a bit less intimidated by this very powerful tool Inkscape has. But here is the thing, there is one last category, the experimental effects. I feel that since we've seen all other effects, we might as well check those ones out. Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos on Inkscape and illustration. For now, we're done. See you next week. Bye!